lies, money, and a rapper with a target on his back. These were at the core of the defense's closing argument in the Sean Combs trial. Diddy's lead attorney gave his final address to the jury, making the case that his client was innocent of federal sex crime charges. Now, the jury must decide if those arguments are enough. It was another major day in court. The defense wrapped up its final statement to jurors before deliberations begin. Their job was to walk jurors through the testimony and exhibits and convince them that Sean Combs should be found not guilty on all counts. Those included racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking charges involving Cassie, Ventura, Jane, and Fine, and finally, transportation with the intent to commit prostitution. Closing arguments came a day after the prosecution gave their summation. Prosecutor Cassie laid out how Combs ran a criminal operation. She said his assistants and bodyguards didn't just know what was happening, they helped him do it and then cover it up. One by one, she went through the alleged crimes linked to the racketeering charge. The government only needs to prove from the list bribery, arson, kidnapping, forced labor, drug offenses. Then came the separate sex trafficking charges. Involving Cassie and Jane, Slavic reminded the jury that even if someone consents once or twice, that doesn't equal ongoing consent. All it takes is one confirmed act of trafficking to convict. She gave multiple clear examples to choose from. Then there was the charge about transporting victims for prostitution. Slavic pointed to receipts, credit card activity, travel records, and text conversations. She argued that Combs not only arranged for the women and the men to travel, he paid for it, and it was for sex. The defense responded today. We also got to hear the prosecution's rebuttal brief, but powerful. Now, for deeper insight, Law and Crime's Elizabeth Milner was in the room, listening to every word of the closing arguments both from lead defense attorney Mark Agnifilo and federal prosecutor Maureen Comey. Let's start with Agnifilo. His tone to the jury stood out. He was conversational, almost charming. He wanted to be relatable. One of the first things he said was, "This is a tale of two trials." One trial, he claimed, was based on real texts, video, and evidence. The other was, in his view, just storytelling from prosecutors. He argued that everything was blown out of proportion, that the case wasn't about crime, but about personal drug use. He said the freak-offs, the hotel nights, the incidents described by Jane and Cassidy's were just consensual encounters, swinging, an alternative lifestyle, not crime. Then he painted a picture of Combs as a brilliant, self-made black entrepreneur. He reminded the jury how many government witnesses testified that being around Combs was like drinking from a fire hose. He inspired them. He worked them hard. Not everyone liked him, but many respected him. He brought up Mia, who had once considered self-harm after losing her position at Combs Enterprises, emphasizing that she was talking about a job, not abuse. That business, Agnifilo argued, shouldn't be confused with the criminal enterprise prosecutors alleged. Then came Derek Ferguson, former CFO of Bad Boy. He called Combs a successful man who created opportunities for people who looked like him, even when Ferguson brought up diversity and inclusion. Agnifilo pointed out Combs had been doing that in his 20s, before it was fashionable. The day continued with major developments in the criminal trial of Sean Diddy. Combs, his defense team delivered their final statement to the jury, a last opportunity to dismantle the prosecution's case and convince jurors to acquit Combs on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking of Cassie, Ventura, Jane, and Fine, and transporting individuals for prostitution. Leading the defense, attorney Mark Agnifilo addressed the jury with a direct tone. This came right after prosecutor Cassie gave her closing, where she painted Combs as the orchestrator of a criminal enterprise, one enabled by assistants and bodyguards who helped commit and then conceal various crimes. She meticulously outlined each alleged act tied to racketeering, bribery, arson, kidnapping, drug-related activity, and forced labor. The law only requires proof of two such crimes. Slavic pressed further, saying one act of sex trafficking regardless of consent at other times is enough for conviction. The prosecution claimed they offered more than one instance involving Jane and Cassie, complete with concrete examples. On the count of transporting for prostitution, they presented travel receipts, card statements, texts, and voice notes to show Combs coordinated and paid for travel specifically for sex work. So, what did the defense counter with? We also heard briefly from the prosecution's rebuttal argument later that day. Law and Crime's courtroom reporter Elizabeth Milner was present for the entire exchange. She reported that defense attorney Mark Agnifilo opened his remarks by asserting, "This is not what the prosecution wants you to believe." He argued that the prosecution had exaggerated everything. According to him, this case was not about federal crimes, it was about personal drug use, consensual sex, and lifestyle choices. He portrayed Combs as a successful, self-made black entrepreneur. Tone to the jury was relaxed and personable. He described two trials, one based on hard evidence like texts and videos, and the other, as he claimed, driven by exaggeration and hearsay. He described the so-called freak-offs and hotel nights as part of an alternative lifestyle, not criminal activity. Agnifilo argued that Combs had created respected businesses. He reminded jurors of former staff who testified to his work ethic. If they didn't always like him, many admired him. He referenced a former CFO at Bad Boy who said he wanted to work for Combs because he created opportunities for people of color, promoting diversity and inclusion as early as age 24. The defense emphasized that not a single witness took the stand and claimed, "I was part of a criminal enterprise." Not one. This was a key point for Agnifilo. He also touched on Mia's testimony, where she said she'd considered self-harm after losing her job with Combs. Agnifilo highlighted that this was with Combs Enterprises, a legitimate business, not the alleged criminal enterprise. He brought up KK Christina Courtroom, whom he called Combs' right-hand woman, arguing she provided assistance but never committed crimes. When Cassie and her friend Carrie Morgan claimed Combs once brought a hammer to Cassie's apartment, they didn't call the police. Instead, they contacted KK and Dr. OC. Agnifilo asked, if KK and Dr. OC were part of a conspiracy, why didn't the government charge them? He noted that a celebrity like Combs would, of course, have private security and assistants doing errands. Does Beyoncé go to CVS? He asked, implying that this level of support staff is normal for someone of Combs' status. Mark Agnifilo transitioned into addressing the most serious charge, racketeering conspiracy, which carries a potential life sentence. He carefully explained to the jury that this wasn't simply a charge of racketeering. It was conspiracy to racketeer, which, by law, required proof of a shared criminal purpose and an agreement among multiple individuals to commit specific crimes. And yet, Combs was the only person charged. No one else in the courtroom, no co-defendant, and no cooperating witnesses took the stand to admit they participated in any such conspiracy. According to Agnifilo, that was a gaping hole in the government's case. He reminded the jury that even one of the people the government alleged to be a co-conspirator, Combs' bodyguard, Fahim Muhammad, was sitting in the courtroom watching the proceedings, yet was never called to testify. No deals, no statements, no Agnifilo subtly hinted at the awkwardness of the government's silence on that matter. Returning to KK Christina Courtroom, Agnifilo said, everyone needs a KK. He emphasized she wasn't enabling crimes, she was just a dedicated assistant. When he said the line, Diddy visibly nodded in agreement. Agnifilo then referenced an alleged 2016 incident where Combs reportedly showed up to Cassie's apartment with a hammer. The two women, instead of calling the authorities, contacted KK and Dr. OC. The defense used this to argue that if these individuals were co-conspirators, wouldn't it have made more sense for them to take more criminal action, or at the very least, not be contacted in crisis moments? The defense framed Combs' security detail as standard for a celebrity of his status. Cassie had testified about carrying firearms in her purse for Combs. Agnifilo responded, that's what security does, they carry weapons, especially for high-profile clients. He maintained the security team acted within the bounds of the law. He then pivoted to an uncomfortable but strategic point. In reference to one of Cassie's stories about her sexual experiences, Agnifilo posed a rhetorical question to the jury. If your partner likes something and you don't, do you always refuse? He acknowledged it was an awkward moment, and some jurors squirmed. But his point was that people do things in relationships they may not always enjoy. That, he said, doesn't equate to sex trafficking. That this was central to Agnifilo's argument. Combs couldn't have known that. Cassie or Jane didn't want to engage in the so-called freak-offs if they never told him. He insisted these were consenting adults participating in what the defense called alternative lifestyles, not criminal enterprises. In addressing Cassie's case specifically, Agnifilo argued that you can't retroactively call consensual sex trafficking just because someone regrets it later. He ridiculed the prosecution's theory that one moment out of many could be used to convict someone of trafficking. If someone participates in 75 freak-offs and one feels different, does that make the entire relationship criminal? He asked. The defense took aim at the prosecution's claim that Combs trafficked Cassie. If this is sex trafficking, then I guess you can traffic your girlfriend now, Agnifilo quipped, dismissing the notion that lovers participating in wild behavior constituted a federal crime. He also scrutinized three events cited by the government: Cannes Film Festival, a 2012 incident involving Cassie and Daniel Phillip, and the infamous 2016 altercation at the Intercontinental Hotel. While the prosecution said these proved sex trafficking, the defense countered by showing a post Cassie made on Instagram after the hotel incident. She referred to it as domestic violence, not trafficking. To Agnifilo, that mattered. He argued the case, at best, was about toxic love, not a criminal enterprise. As Agnifilo continued, he differentiated Cassie's allegations from those of Jane, noting that Jane's motivations seemed more transactional. He described Jane as someone who liked the trappings of the lifestyle, what she gained from it. especially the social visibility. Her involvement, he argued, was driven by the status and perks that came with being associated with Combs, which included appearing in social media content, being part of an inner circle, and receiving material benefits. To challenge the government's sex trafficking allegation, Agnifilo pointed to a specific instance from September 2023. The prosecution had claimed this was a clear-cut case of trafficking, but the defense presented a text Jane sent during the same time, in which she liked a link to Cowboys for Angels, a site tied to escort services. Agnifilo used this to argue that Jane was not being coerced, she was actively participating, even directing aspects of the arrangement. He read aloud a text in which Jane complained that one of the male entertainers was not up to her standards and had to be sent away, referring to him as a bum of a cowboy. Yet, she still paid him through Venmo. To Agnifilo, this illustrated that she was in control, not being exploited. He said the prosecution was trying to turn every hotel night into a crime scene, when in fact, this was all part of an adult lifestyle, one Jane had full agency in. He also referenced an event from October 2023, a so-called sobriety party. Jane had apparently been upset with another woman, Gina, but still went through with a freak-off that night. The defense emphasized that no one forced her, maybe she regretted it afterward, but regret isn't the same as coercion. Agnifilo argued. She agreed to it. That's the end of it, he said. Then there was the matter of rent. The jury was shown that Combs paid around $10,000 a month to house Jane and her child. The prosecution framed this as part of the trafficking operation. Agnifilo, however, insisted it was a generous act, that Combs was simply helping care for someone else's child, doing what he thought was right, and continuing to do so even while behind bars. He argued this pointed to a man acting out of kindness, not criminal intent. Agno also revealed that Jane was not just a passive participant in this lifestyle. He said she had a history of organizing these sexual encounters herself, booking male escorts, coordinating nights with other entertainers. He named two, in particular, Cabral and Antoine. He claimed this behavior was consistent and deliberate, not the actions of someone being trafficked or coerced. In one of the more recent incidents, the prosecution had cited an altercation on June 18th and 19th of the previous year. Agnifilo acknowledged that something had happened between Combs and Jane that night. He didn't deny that Jane had visible injuries, but he said, nothing about the night made sense. Jane had allegedly slammed Combs' head into a countertop and accused him of being a pedophile. Citing his relationship with a 21-year-old, argued that she was deliberately trying to provoke him and noted that she changed into a dress before leaving, not sweats, as someone escaping a dangerous situation might. He questioned why, if she had been hiding for 2 hours behind a wall, in fear, as she claimed of that fear stopped her from changing clothes before exiting. He claimed that her story didn't align with common sense, and the jury needed to ask whether her account truly held up. By the end of this section, Agnifilo was visibly more animated, driving home the point that the prosecution's case was riddled with gaps and assumptions. He wasn't asking the jury to like Combs, just to doubt the version of events the government had painted. Turning to the charges of racketeering and predicate crimes, Agnifilo challenged the credibility and relevance of several witnesses. He began with Kid Cudi, addressing the government's claim that Combs orchestrated the arson of Cudi's car. According to the defense, Cassie had portrayed Cudi as a romantic interest, but Cudi himself testified that he and Cassie weren't even involved. Agnifilo argued that Cassie had lied to both Cudi and Combs to appear as if she were keeping it gangster, a phrase he repeated more than once, as if to underline how absurd he found the entire setup. The glove evidence, which had surfaced in the fire investigation, was also downplayed. Agnifilo emphasized that the glove was never conclusively linked to Combs, and that a partial DNA sample pointing to a female further clouded the claim. No charges had ever come out of that incident, and the investigation had stalled years ago. Moving on to Capricorn Clark, Agnifilo devoted significant attention to her allegations. Clark claimed she had been kidnapped in 2004 and subjected to repeated polygraph tests in an abandoned building Combs was converting into a bad boy office. The government painted this as a form of psychological and physical coercion. The defense countered with a single line of attack: she went home every night. Does that sound like kidnapping? Agnifilo asked, turning directly to the jury. You're here in court every day and go home at night. Does that make you kidnapped? He argued that Clark had continued to pursue her job at Bad Boy, indicating she wasn't being held against her will. He even went as far as implying that she might have had a personal affection for Combs, suggesting without quite saying it that perhaps her emotional disappointment had colored her testimony. He read a message where she had written, "We misused our dope chemistry," and let the words hang in the air for effect. Agnifilo also dismissed the idea that Combs ever brandished a weapon at Clark. Why would a man with so much to lose, false business reputation, pull a gun on a staff member? He asked rhetorically. He highlighted that no gun was ever recovered, and that both Cuddy and Cassie had said Clark never mentioned a gun at the time. The defense then turned to Mia's allegations. Focusing on the supposed witness tampering involving Dr. O.C., the government claimed that Dr. O.C. contacted Mia in an attempt to silence her, but Agnifilo argued that Mia herself had texted a message indicating she was out of Skrilla slang for money. That detail, he said, was important. The message suggested she had a financial motive, not fear, and that Dr. O.C.'s offer to help was just that, an offer, not a threat. He reminded the jury that Dr. O.C.'s message didn't contain any coercion, blackmail, or even a veiled threat. He underscored how important it was to look at these predicate crimes with skepticism. Without solid proof of even two of the alleged acts, arson, kidnapping, drug distribution, forced labor, the racketeering conspiracy couldn't stand. This isn't racketeering, he repeated. This is a successful man with a complicated personal life. Then he drew back, making the broader point. He accused the government of spinning an elaborate web from casual texts, lifestyle choices, and regrettable behavior, calling it a conspiracy when it was, in his words, just a messy life. Agnifilo's closing tone was firm but calculated. He wasn't pleading, he was challenging the jury to look past the headlines, the assumptions, and the spectacle. It's not about whether you like him, he said. It's about what you can prove and what you can't. Shifting toward the sex trafficking charges, Agnifilo addressed Jane and Cassie's testimonies directly. He acknowledged that their stories were emotionally charged, but insisted that they didn't amount to criminal conduct. His central argument was simple. These were adult relationships filled with consensual acts, strange or offensive to some, but not illegal for Cassie. He reiterated a familiar theme. She stayed. She lived with Combs, traveled with him, accepted gifts, and maintained the relationship. If this was sex trafficking, where was the lack of consent? He told the jury that she may have disliked aspects of the relationship, but that doesn't make her a victim under the law. You can dislike something, he said, but that doesn't mean you were trafficked. Agnifilo walked the jury through the three specific events the prosecution alleged as trafficking. An incident in Cannes, a 2012 freak-off involving Daniel Phillip, and the Intercontinental Hotel assault. For the Cannes trip, he said nothing illegal occurred, just to adults engaging in sexual activity during a trip. Regarding Daniel Phillip, Agnifilo noted that even if Combs was abusive after the fact, that had nothing to do with the escort. Being trafficked, it's bad, he said, but bad doesn't mean criminal. The Intercontinental Hotel footage was the most difficult to refute. Agnifilo showed the video in court but notably skipped the portion where Combs is seen dragging and kicking Cassie. Still, he pushed the argument that this was domestic violence, not sex trafficking. He referenced Cassie's own Instagram post where she referred to the experience as a moment of domestic abuse, ever once mentioning trafficking. As for Jane, the defense painted her differently. Agnifilo argued she was far more transactional in status, money, and lifestyle. He cited text messages, Instagram posts, and party attendance. Jane liked the attention. She chose the clothes, the hotels, the men. When one escort didn't meet her standards, she texted that he was a bum cowboy and had him sent away. This wasn't coercion, Agnifilo said. This was preference. He showed messages where Jane coordinated payments for entertainers. Through Venmo, he said she ran the show as much as anyone. He even claimed she continued to participate in freak-offs willingly, despite expressing dislike for certain aspects. People do things in relationships they don't love, he said. That's not trafficking. That's compromise. Agnifilo also addressed the October 2023 sobriety party, where Jane allegedly agreed to another hotel night. He claimed she did so voluntarily, even though she later regretted it. Regret, he stressed, doesn't turn a consensual act into a crime. He then moved into a more personal angle. Combs, he said, paid Jane's rent $10,000 a month. He provided for her child, even while behind bars. That's not trafficking, Agnifilo said. That's generosity. He also claimed Jane had a hand in hiring escorts. She was in the porn scene, he said. She wasn't being exploited. She was participating. Finally, Agnifilo addressed the June 2023 incident where Jane accused Combs of physical abuse. He admitted there was some kind of altercation and that she had visible injuries, but said the details didn't make sense. Jane changed into a dress instead of sweats while fleeing. She claimed she hid behind a wall for 2 hours. It's not logical, he said. She was upset. She struck him. And now, months later, it's being reimagined. He didn't deny tension or drama but said the jury had to find criminal intent. You can be a bad boyfriend, he said. That doesn't make you a sex trafficker. As he reached the final minutes of his argument, Mark Agnifilo lowered his voice, slowed his pace, and spoke directly to the jurors. He reminded them that the burden of proof rested entirely on the government. They have to prove every charge, beyond a reasonable doubt, he said. Not maybe, not probably. Beyond a reasonable doubt. He circled back to the themes he had built throughout: exaggeration, consent, alternative lifestyles, and the absence of clear criminal coordination. He told the jury that Cassie's civil settlement undermined the claim of true victimhood. Jane's social media posts and text messages painted a different story, and that the other witnesses lacked credibility or offered no direct link to a criminal enterprise. Then, in a deliberate voice, he posed a rhetorical question to the jury. Is it illegal to be a controlling boyfriend? Is it illegal to make bad personal decisions? No, it's not. And that's what this case really is: bad relationships twisted into crimes. They are not. He gestured briefly toward the prosecution table and said, "They want you to believe in monsters, but you saw the real man flawed. Yes, but not a criminal." Agnifilo emphasized that no co-conspirators were ever charged. No witness took the stand and said they were in on some grand scheme. "There's no enterprise," he said. "There's no conspiracy. There's just one man, one life, and a lot of assumptions." In closing, he asked the jury to look past headlines, past bias, and into the evidence, or the lack of it. Today, you represent the United States, not the prosecutors. You, and I'm asking you, based on what you've seen, heard, and known, to return a verdict of not guilty on all counts. Return him to his family. He stepped back, quiet, letting the weight of his words hang in the room. The courtroom settled into stillness as the judge thanked both sides and turned to address the jury. Deliberations were to begin Monday, but before they filed out, the prosecution stood one last time. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey delivered the rebuttal, short but surgical. She opened by saying the defense spent more time attacking the victims and the government than addressing the core facts. In Combs's world, she said, no doesn't mean no. It means try again, harder. She dismissed the suggestion that escorts were there for companionship, reminding the jury that Daniel Phillip testified he only got paid when sex occurred. This wasn't about company, it was about control. Comey confronted the racketeering charges head-on. She argued that an enterprise doesn't need a logo or a membership list. "No one says I'm a criminal conspirator," she told the jury, "but the evidence, the texts, the payments, the threats, the coordination speaks louder than denials." She addressed Cassie, Jane, and Mia, saying each had already walked away from Combs with either nothing or settlements. "They didn't need to be here," she said. "They came forward because this mattered, because it's the truth." Point by point, she dismantled the idea that these were just alternative lifestyles. This wasn't about threesomes, she said. This was about coercion, violence, and control. She ended without dramatics, just a firm, quiet statement. "You know what this was, and now, it's your turn to act." With that, the jury was excused to begin deliberations. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited, reporters murmured. The world would now hold its breath. Inside, the clock had started. And for Sean Combs's future lay in 12 hands, behind one door, with one word waiting: verdict.